He's gosh, who is he with? He's a lobbyist now.
So he's probably looking for COVID. I wonder if the COVID link is sending people here too.
Well, I mean, that started a half an hour ago. They should have been in.
Gotcha. Okay, guys, we are officially live.
Good morning, everybody, and welcome to the joint. Welcome to the joint. Hold on one second. I gotta get.
No problem. Well, welcome everyone to the meeting. In the age of COVID, it just wouldn't be the same if we didn't have a few technical difficulties, but we're working them out. Okay.
Sorry about that. Gotta love working from home. So welcome everybody to the second of our meetings for the Joint Committee on Cybersecurity, IT, and Biotechnology. My name is Senator Katie Hester. I represent Ellicott City, Western Howard County, and Southern Carroll County. And it's my pleasure to co-chair this committee along with Delegate Michael Jackson. He is currently doing double duty and will join us at 11 o'clock when the COVID-19 committee that's currently meeting ends. And so with his apologies, we'll go ahead and get started. We have a great lineup today. First of all, we will have a presentation from the Department of Homeland Security. Franco Coppa will be joining us today to present on the services that DHS provides to states and counties to assist in cybersecurity, preparedness, and readiness. And this is all free. So that's the first thing. Secondly, we will be joined by Secretary Leahy and our state CISO, Chip Stewart from Do It, and they will be presenting on the strategic master plan for 2020 to 2023. Finally, we will be working with, we will just be discussing some of the bills that various members of the committee plan to reintroduce or introduce for the first time during this upcoming session in January. So with that, I would like to turn it over to Franco Coppa, the Cybersecurity Advisor for the Cybersecurity and Infrastructure Security Agency. Say that 5 times fast. Thank you so much for being with us today, Franco. Over to you.
Thank you, Senator. I appreciate the invite. It's great to be here with you folks. I'm happy to explain a bit, what actually CISA, who CISA is and what CISA does. And as you said, the services are at no cost. We prefer to use the term no cost versus free because it's taxpayer money, so we all pay for it, but it's all available for our organization. So without any further ado, let's move to the next slide, please. So just to give some background, the CISA was established 2 years ago. So in November 2018. So in about a month, less than a month, we'll be 2 years old. We existed before. We were a directorate under DHS. Now we are agency on its own. So basically, we are the same level as TSA, Secret Service, FEMA, and so on and so forth. So with our own budget, let's say, and we are the nation's risk advisory. And next slide, please. So our mission, CISA, is to help protecting critical infrastructure, and of course, state, local organizations, entities are part, what is critical infrastructure. Let's move to next slide. Okay, so there are 16 sectors that CISA, and when actually this was established in 2002, were identified as critical for the well-being of our nation. And of course, government is one of those 16 sectors, with all county, municipalities, state level, and that's all part, let's say, of what we consider being critical for our nation. Next slide, please. So the CISA is a cybersecurity infrastructure security agency. So we kind of cover both cyber and physical. If you look at the presidential directive, actually, that gives us the authority, BPD 21, it talks about this interdependency, if you will, between cyber and physical. In our, at this point, I guess it's clear for everybody, it's difficult probably to separate what is physical versus what is cyber. Entirely, let's say, cyber and physical have a little bit of a, if you look at the bottom right part of the slide where it says cyber attacks will soon kill people. I don't want to sound like, too, I don't want to make it, too big as a deal, but that actually can be the true. Meaning that, just I always like to give you an example, and I use, the insulin pumps that people may carry under attached to their bodies. Those now can be also controlled, via your mobile phone. So if I were to hack your mobile phone now, I'm actually able to control your insulin pumps, and of course that means that I can physically have an effect on you. Of course, if you were to have disruption in that or misuse of the function, the pump, you may have a very, very bad day. So, and of course, this is also now, that's just an example. And if you think about for your energy sector, electricity, water, where you have switches, you have other pumps, you have systems that are controlled. Let's say that, or physical systems are controlled by cyber means. That gives you that perspective. Why is that critical? Next slide, please. So CISA tries to, our role is to partner with organizations that are considered critical, and as stated before, definitely state and local organizations are considered, critical infrastructure. And we have two, a message mostly of preparedness. So we try to help organization being prepared. So we try to advocate resilience, because we all understand that things are going to happen, right? Unfortunately, we cannot at this point say, no, we can protect and nothing's going to happen. Things are going to happen. So we can try to be prepared for those situations, but also with understanding that we need to understand how to become resilient. So that's our message. So there are a bunch of services that help organizations in being prepared and ready and resilient, let's say, to situations. But also, next slide, please. But we also help with the response. So if there is a situation, an incident, an event, we also have, let's say, an incident response capability. And I will talk, more specifically about that also in a slide later on. Myself, as the center indicated, I'm a cybersecurity advisor. So I cover the cyber in the field, so within Maryland, in this case, there are also some cybersecurity advisors, actually called PSAs, or protective security advisors, and some emergency communication advisors. So people that actually deal with 911 type issues. So let's say communication that has an impact, at the state level or nationally eventually. So those are, let's say, the three major field forces that, like myself, can help organization in achieving that, resilience. Next slide, please. So one of the way, let's say, to understand how resilient you are, how prepared you are to situations, to respond to incidents, it's of course through assessments. Next slide, please. So as you can see, there are a bunch of assessments that we can perform at no cost, as we said before, that organizations like local, state organizations, government organizations can consume and request. Some are not technical in nature, like if you see from the top, the cyber resilience review. I have a slide specific for that, so I'll talk more about that, in the later stage, all the way down to a very technical one or a pen test. For those that are not familiar with the terminology of pen test, basically the ability to penetrate an organization's environment from a, could be cyber and physical, but in this case, we'll talk about, from a cyber perspective. And I'll have a few actually slides that will talk about some of these services that you see here listed, just to give a bit of a highlights, if you will. Next slide. So I mentioned the first one, in the list, it's a cyber resilience review. It's basically an assessment that can be performed at your organization. It takes about 6 hours to do. It's about 300 questions. So we sit down with organizations, with people that have an understanding about how the organization operates. So both from a an IT and also business perspective. And we go through again this set of questions, and what we provide as a result, it's a report that shows deficiencies based on how mature the organization is to respond to to incident and situations. The CRR is based on the Carnegie Mellon maturity model that was created some time back, but also aligned with the NIST cybersecurity framework. And most organizations use or follow, or comply to or at least strive to comply with the NIST cybersecurity framework. All the services that we actually offer, we are not regulatory in nature. So CISA has a regulatory component, but that's that's just for something very specific. But otherwise, people like myself and my colleagues, we go out and we're not going to audit an organization, but we're going to help organization through these assessments. So if you're interested, you can request assessment, you can come over and do the assessment. We of course protect the information. We will not disclose and share with anybody in the federal space or outside the federal space. Next slide, please. Excuse me. Another an assessment that we can perform. It's called a cyber infrastructure survey. And that's actually, this is not a report, but it's actually access to a dashboard or a portal. So we assess how, let's say, we upload information about 80 cybersecurity controls that are important for an organization to have in order to be, again, resilient. And then this portal, this dashboard, becomes your tool. So our role is just to upload information for you. Then we grant access to you once the information has been, let's say, protected and all that. We grant access to you or your organizations, and you can use this tool for your budgetary type of also analysis, because it gives you the ability to go through some scenarios that help you understand how prepared you are. For example, if you were to respond to a DDoS, denial of service attack, that will show how prepared you are or where your deficiencies, so where you maybe want to invest some money. Again, very good tool that takes half day to go through, and then it becomes your tool. Next slide. There's something that you could do today. It's actually download the CSET, or the Cybersecurity Evaluation Tool. It's something that you can, again, carry on at any point of time. If you just type Google CSET, it will take you to the download page. There's also a YouTube channel where you can see information about what it is and what it does. It's a great tool. It's a self-contained environment, so you can run that. You can do assessments. You can create diagrams. You can take advantage of templates that are actually available. And this works in both the IT and OT environment. Again, for those not familiar with OT environments, it's those SCADA type systems. So where you have industrial control systems, where you have those physical switches, pumps that are controlled by cyber means. So that tool actually gives the ability to assess and understand how prepared you are in both IT and OT environments. Next slide, please. So another one that's actually available, it's very simple and easy to request. It's Cyber Hygiene, or basically the ability to scan your internet-facing IPs. So what we do in this case, you tell us, your internet publicly IP systems. So basically those systems that can be accessed from or that anybody could see without being connected to your organization, and we can scan those systems and give you a report with where the vulnerabilities are, so what your systems are vulnerable to, and what to do to mitigate those situations. Again, also going back to the other assessment that I talked about before, we also give those recommendations for all the deficiencies that we found that we find eventually during the assessment. So you just don't get report, you also get some instructions about how to improve and mitigate those issues. Next slide, please. And then the last one, that was in that list that I showed before, it's the penetration test. As I said before, the ability to actually penetrate your environment. And this comes in two flavors. One is where there is also a physical, an on-site visit. Where we can also pen test, from an internal perspective, or just remote called, RPT, or remote pen test. All these services, are, this is of course more technical, and some of the services are actually performed by our headquarter folks. Some are performed by field missions, but nevertheless, they are available at no cost for you guys. And next slide, please. So we also offer training and exercise. If you enjoy, let's say, a .gov email, you can today have access to FedBTE and the NICS, the website, where we offer actually training. And it's a free training. There are thousands of training that you can have access to. So if you don't have that access yet, go to FedBTE, request access with a .gov.gov email address. You're granted access right away, and you can enjoy those thousands of trainings. We also help facilitating exercises. So to see how prepared you are, test, let's say, your instant response, and see again if you have everything prepared, let's say, for possible situations and incidents. Next slide, please. So of course, we're the government, so we can also share lots of information. It comes in different flavors, automated, machine-to-machine type of informations, and that we can exchange if you are interested, or even through other organizations like ISACs, and you're probably familiar with MS-ISACs, the multi-state, ISAC, or fusion centers that are also, present in state. In Maryland, the MCAC is the fusion center in a Baltimore area that covers the state, and all these, let's say, it's again available at no cost. Next slide, please. We also, if you're familiar with the US CERT, maybe you already signed up with some of the our feeds that we can or information that we can share. So alerts and bulletins and so on and so forth. If you haven't, I will definitely recommend to go to your cert.gov or CISA.gov and actually subscribe to the services, so you can start seeing what's happening. One of these have been published and other recommendations. Next slide, please. So when you actually, if you haven't had the chance to go to the CISA.gov website, I would definitely recommend doing that. There's lots of information, a wealth of information that you can find there. And there's also a way, I have highlighted the report button. So if you click on that button, that will, will take you to a page where, will give you different options to how to contact, CISA in order to receive support if you are experiencing an incident. Of course, it's always better to establish relationships before that happens. But if you don't know what to do, you have an incident, you haven't established these relationships with us yet, follow that page and we'll tell you what to do. Next slide, please. Okay, so part of also what we do, it's the incident response is through our CISA Watch Center, and it's a 24/7, 365 days capability where we have presentations from different federal agencies, and this is where we monitor the nation, and also we can support people, organizations, requesting support and help. Next slide, please. So from a federal perspective, we talk about two different types of responses when there is an incident: threat response and asset response. Next slide, please. So next slide. Okay, perfect. Thank you. So this is what a threat response looks like and what asset response looks like. Meaning that a threat response it's usually done by FBI, Secret Service. It's your law enforcement. CISA is doing what we call asset response. Basically, to give an analogy, we are the firefighters of an incident, right? So we want to bring you back to business as quick as possible. So we help you with the mitigation of that. But the investigation, attribution, and all that is done by the FBI or other, let's say, law enforcement that are responsible for that threat type of response, capability. Next slide is last slide with my contact information. So I know I went kind of quickly through those capabilities. I mentioned to Ricky, who's actually Ms. Duncan, who's coordinating, these or facilitating, these actually effort. You're welcome to reach out to me directly. My information is there, or Mr. Duncan can eventually share the information, my slides if needed. But again, feel free to actually get back to me if needed. With that, we'll conclude my presentation. And fortunately, I cannot take questions right now because I need to go to a different meeting. But I appreciate very much the opportunity, Senator. Thanks so much for the invite. I'll be here just for a few seconds to conclude my presentation.
Thank you so much for that really comprehensive overview of the services that you offer, which definitely looks highly valuable. Since you don't have time to answer questions right now, I'd like to suggest that committee members either chat their messages to committee staff and we compile them and send them to you, or email them to committee staff. Would that be okay, Mr. Kappa?
That would be fantastic. Thank you, Senator. Again, I'll be happy to entertain questions at a later time, or even have other meetings if needed, or answer questions by email, whatever form or shape that it suits you and your students and the other senators that are officials that are actually elected officials that are on the call. So very happy to do that. Again, thank you so much for the invite.
Thank you very much, and have a great, safe day.
You too, ma'am.
Great. Okay. And I'd just like to thank committee staff for lining that up. I know that we've had scheduling, issues with this committee hearing. And I'd like to welcome Delegate Sandy Bartlett, who just joined us. Welcome, Delegate. And so just by point of clarification, we are now kind of, hopefully we'll have a few more members join us now that the COVID-19 hearing is over. I can't seem to chat any of you using this Zoom function. So if you want to ask a question, of our next panelist, please either raise your hand or I guess chat with committee staff so we know to call on you. It's just some kind of weird functionality with the way the Zoom is configured that I can't actually chat with any of you directly. My apologies. And like I said, I certainly have, I guess Dr. Franco had to leave, but maybe Ricky, what we could do is just ask a few questions right now so that we don't lose the momentum, and then we could follow up.
Yeah, we could do that, and we could take notes.
Okay, so one of my questions would have been that is kind of about the rollout of this and whether it would be deployed at the enterprise level or at the individual agency level. And if we could get an example of another state and how they've proceeded, that would be incredibly helpful. I can see, what?
I do have a little bit of an answer. When I spoke with him last week, he mentioned that they cannot share any experience from any other state, which he said as a positive. So if Maryland were to take on some of these tests and assessments, like by law, they cannot, I forget what exact federal law it is, but they cannot share their experiences or the results or even the fact that they went and helped those.
Okay, so let me ask my question differently. Yes. First question is, can they do this at the enterprise level, here in Maryland? So that we would have we as the state would have oversight of what the various agencies are doing. So that's the first question.
Yeah.
And then I guess the second question, I was looking for an example. So if they can't share from other states, maybe hypothetically, given all those tools, what would they suggest as, a year one kind of approach? in a state such as Maryland? Like, how do you piece those 8 to 10 tools together? What do you do in year 1? What do you do in year 2? Do you do all agencies at the same time? But just kind of like, how would it actually look in year 1, year 2, and year 3? So those are my 2 questions. Do other committee staff have, sorry, not committee staff, do other members have questions they would like them to answer? Or other members on the phone? I know we have our state CISO here. Do you have any questions you would like them to answer for you, Chip?
Nothing for me.
I guess it's all quiet. And I'm looking in the chat box. Do you see anything in the chat box with you, Erica?
No.
Okay. Well, I would just like to welcome, we've had somebody else join. Senator Lee, I believe, is here. Hello, Senator Lee. Thank you for joining us. Okay. Let us move on then. If anybody does think of questions they would like answered, please, as I said, email committee staff and we'll compile a list to send over to the department. With that being said, let me just pull up my next point on the agenda. And so now we are going to move into a presentation by Secretary Leahy and our state's Chief Risk Security Officer, Chip Stewart, on behalf of the Department of Information Technology to explain their master plan for the next 3 years, which was just released a short while ago. I've had a chance to look at this plan, and it has laid out a high level where we currently stand as a state, where they believe we should be moving in terms of managing our IT infrastructure. And I really think it's critical that we as a committee are aware of this broader strategic vision that has been set out for our IT system. So I'm very happy to have the Secretary and Mr. Stewart back here again. Welcome.
Well, good morning, Madam Chair, and obviously good morning to committee members and staff. If Chairman Jackson joins us, certainly I look forward to speaking with him. I'm Mike Leahy, Secretary of the Department of Information Technology. I also want to thank Dr. Kappa for his presentation. And before I get into talking about the master plan itself, I just want to comment very briefly on 2 things that you've mentioned, Madam Chair. And the first is with regard to looking at security on an enterprise versus an agency level. And I'm going to talk to Mr. Stewart about using some of these CISA assets as a way to check against the assessments we're doing ourselves, sort of as a proof point. So we will be happy to keep you apprised of what occurs in that engagement. And secondly, IT has become a very different animal over the last decade in that historically folks in IT were considered the back office programmers that you fed them once in a while, but they stayed in their side of the office where it was dark and dingy and typed away, and they weren't allowed to speak to regular folks too often. And that has changed dramatically. IT has become a partner in not only providing tools that allow subject matter experts to do their job better, but in actually establishing budgets for particular actions and in looking for ways to enhance the operation of an enterprise. And so, Senator, when you talked about the difference between enterprises and agencies, we in Maryland are a bit of a hybrid. As you know, I personally am a big believer that the more things we can do as an enterprise by standardizing and consolidating processes and procedures, the more economically strong we will be, and the easier it will be for us to deal with the requests of both the citizenry and our data partners throughout the state. So I am a big proponent of enterprise activities, and DoIT has taken the position that our one-stop portal is the way we're going to build an enterprise, along with the use of Network Maryland. However, we still have a number of agencies, particularly 5 larger agencies, that are very independent, and so Maryland is still viewed as a federated system. And to your point, looking at things at an enterprise level is going to require a change in culture, not only within the executive branch, but in coordinating things with the comptroller and the treasurer and the legislative branch. And most of what we're doing in this master plan is geared toward creating the policies and procedures that will create that cultural shift. So, having said that, let me just very quickly talk about some of the things we've accomplished that have led to this plan. As I said, we've used the one-stop portal expansion to work in dealing with COVID. We were able to stand up our contact tracing and our other COVID-related tracing instruments in about 6 weeks, which was about a third of the time most folks set up, and at a far lower cost than most other states, simply because we had used the building blocks we already had in place. We're doing a lot of cybersecurity work, as Mr. Stewart can tell you, with our National Guard unit. We have a statewide VoIP project. The radio system, Maryland First, was recognized as a first-place winner in the NASCIO Information Technology Recognition Awards this year, which I'm very excited about. We finished in 3rd place in the country in Digital Governance and Digital Government Experience Awards as with regard to how we're dealing with citizens and our internal work. And we got the highest grade the state's ever received in the Digital State Survey, which was a B+. And we're considered one of the top 3 states in both the sustainability category and in our connected infrastructure category. So there are many things that are moving in the right direction, and my principal frustration is they're not moving faster. So next slide, please. So the ITMP is the Information Technology Master Plan, and it effectively sets out our framework for how DoIT and our partner agencies can work together to, as I said, effectively and efficiently use current and future technology to achieve each of the agency's individual goals and realizing the overall goals of the Hogan administration to best serve the citizens of Maryland. This year's ITMP's chief architect was our Assistant Secretary for Strategic Planning, Steve Colby. Steve is a wonder. He seems to know a little bit about everything, and if asked, he can tell you a lot about everything. So most states do have a master plan, and Steve went through all 50 of the master plans to look at their IT goals, what drives their processes. He actually spoke to a number of CIOs in other states and their staff and set up this plan to compare and contrast the best practices that are available to us to ensure that Maryland's on the cutting edge of statewide IT management. And our ITMP focuses on the environment as a whole, and the report talks about our accomplishments, as I noted earlier. Our current IT outlay for the state, and I'm going to say a bit more about that in a moment, the statewide IT governance, which we are required to create by statute, and the purpose and guiding principles for the document so that the agencies actually understand that we're not trying to take control of their missions and their jobs, but rather help them find and build the tools to be more successful. We're also looking in the plan at our investment model. We, as Dr. Kappa said, don't know how to protect what we have if we don't know what we have. So we have adopted TBM, which is Technology Business Management, as our accounting principles for IT, and we are looking at each agency to determine what IT assets they actually have and how they're utilized. Finally, we set out the organization's goals and objectives and what we think is the future vision for IT in the state. Next slide, please. So, why is this written? And the simple answer is it's a good practice to think about where you are and where you want to go strategically and to have a vision for people. But, the legislature gave us this responsibility and authority under the Maryland Code State Finance and Procurement Article, Section 3A 303, that states specifically the Secretary is responsible for carrying out the following duties. And in fact, one of them is laying out this plan. And to take it a step further, we also believe that this plan will serve as the basis, as I said, for the cultural changes that allow us to be more effective and efficient in management of our technology resources and dealing with our technology debt and our modernization requirements, so that in as many cases as possible, the state has many systems that have been operational for a number of years. If we can leapfrog technologies and find more effective ways to do things today, we're not going to do that in an evolutionary way. We're going to jump to what is proven to be the current best practice. And next slide, please. So all of this goes to us developing a governance framework, and the master plan is the basis for our framework. And if you look at the Do It website, you'll see that we have initiated the creation of a technology policy catalog and a State of Maryland Information Security Technology Manual that are going to lay out where all of our IT policies and all of our security protocols exist, so that anyone who has an interest can find them conveniently in one place. And it also gives us the ability to use those to update information for folks on a more regular basis. And it, in effect, creates that consolidation effort that I've talked about, that by consolidating the documentation, we hopefully make it more clear to our partners what it is that our vision entails and what tools are available to bring that to fruition. So next slide, please. So the IT investment model is very interesting in Maryland because, as I said, we are both striving to create an enterprise, and there are a number of services that today we do provide on an enterprise level, for example, Network Maryland and the one-stop portal. But for the most part, the agencies are dealing with the actual applications and functional workflows and forms and tools that they use to use technology to actually apply their subject matter expertise and do their jobs. So we have two tiers for investment, the agency layer and the enterprise layer. And it is our hope that by creating policies that strive to give us access to the best practices available not only across the agencies in the state, but across IT generally, we will be able to blur the lines between the two to create a real enterprise over time. And, you know, the enterprise layer as it exists today basically is going to deal with our telecommunications, our internet workflows, and our cloud services. So, next slide, please. So our goals and strategies at this point are very clear. There's 4 of them. It is to provide IT leadership, as we are charged, to promote the strategic value of IT to agencies, and create that culture of trust that they see us as partners who will help them build tools to make them more effective at their jobs, rather than folks that are attempting to make it an interloper sort of relationship where we're trying to tell them how to do their jobs. That certainly isn't the goal. We want to provide modern infrastructure, and as I said earlier, by implementing TBM, we will have a much better sense of what each agency actually has. We haven't had that as fully as I would like in the past. And finally, we really do want to create measurable improvements in our cybersecurity posture. And although we have not discussed it yet, I do this, unfortunately, to Mr. Stewart, because that's what being a security CISO is. He's got to deal with things that occur quickly and on the fly. I'm going to suggest that in undertaking our assessments, we talk to the folks at CISA about doing parallel assessments. We believe much of what we do is more mature than the assessments they have in place, but I want to test us against their methodologies and get the benefit of their advice, given that we can always miss something and learn from others. So with that, I'm going to ask Mr. Stewart if there's anything he would like to add very quickly, and then I'm happy to answer any questions. So thank you, Senator.
And I would just say I'm very excited to work with Mr. Kappa and team to move that forward.
Excellent. Well, thank you both for that presentation and for taking the time to develop, you know, a thoughtful, kind of visionary, culture-changing plan of action. I have a few questions myself, but I'd also like to open it up to anybody who's on the committee. I'm just checking messages now.
Where does one put the message? I don't see it here. Is it under participants or what?
Senator Lee, I had the same issue. I can only send questions to committee staff, but if you have a question right now, please go ahead and ask it.
Yeah, okay. Secretary, thank you for this presentation. I know now with, you know, telework and more businesses and entities and state entities doing business online, I think that this is going to be, moving forward, that this is going to be more the new norm, even after the pandemic. What is your budget right now to modernize and to accomplish all these? Have you asked, I guess, has the administration put a lot more emphasis now on increasing your budget to ensure that you can meet all these particular needs, and particularly to modernize in the correct way?
Thank you, Senator Lee. It's great to see you. We, like every other agency, have been looking for ways to actually save money because of the fiscal challenges we're about to face because of the reduction of revenues. And our budget actually has not increased. And in fact, we expect a significant decrease next year in the MITDP funding for additional projects. So like every other challenge, we are going to reassess how we prioritize particular issues. And our focus has always been on security, and that has been funded well. Our difficulty there has been finding qualified people that are willing to come to work for the state, given the compensation that's available. Obviously, as you know, the Maryland, Washington, Northern Virginia area is a hotbed of IT and security activity, and we really just can't compete with private firms, or in many ways even with local or county governments. So
I understand that, but you know, with if you can improve your IT capabilities and talents, I think that moving forward, a lot of agencies now and also businesses doing telework, they're going to be seeing tremendous savings and efficiency. And so in light of that, I think that, you know, our state has to be ready for this increased online use of doing business and operating. And we also have to have secure systems, and we have to have the best and brightest IT people. So I think that perhaps we need all to work together to ensure that you have the resources necessary to carry out your mission. And because now it's even more important than ever. So, you know, I don't believe there's not the talent out there. I think there is a talent. But of course, like you said, you be able to attract them too and compete with the private sector.
yes, and to your point, I agree completely. I suspect that the new normal will continue to require more remote work and the implementation of systems, and we are working diligently to bring technology to bear that will standardize that across the executive branch. So, for example, when we started having people work remotely, we implemented a number of different virtual private network technologies because agencies each had their own. We are now working toward creating a singular model to provide secure remote work that simplifies the process and the tools available to agencies. And we expect to have that, you know, available this spring after we start procuring the actual technologies necessary.
Yes, I think consistency is very important. Also, you know, as a state all working together and perhaps, you know, with more consistent protocols and best practices, I think we have to have more consistency. But of course, like I said, this has to be the highest priority, particularly in our administration. I think now telework is going to be used continue to be used even after we find a vaccine and the pandemic is under control. So as I said, I think your agency has probably got to take a huge leadership role now, and also to help the locals too. So, but I think for this being a good step forward, and we want to be able to work with you on this, particularly making this a high priority.
Absolutely, Senator. And as you and I have discussed many times, with the impact of remote work, I think folks are going to become far more concerned and diligent about what is shared with regard to their data and with regard to their personal and their business privacy. And we are looking you know, forward to incorporate that into whatever technologies we apply going forward.
Yeah, and also concerned about things like ransomware, you know, because I don't want to see any of our government entities being shut down. I think we need to be more proactive, perhaps in our approach, and perhaps that's something probably you're exploring too, how to prevent an attack such as that. That's something similar to shut down Baltimore City, and something to shut down lately the Arlington in Virginia, the school system. I think we need to be looking forward at that. And thank you again for all your work and leadership.
Well, thank you, Senator. And Mr. Stewart, just very briefly, you know, could you tell the Senator and the committee what it is we are doing to help the locals if they have a problem at this point, and how we're attempting to build systems so not only can we mitigate those problems, but prevent them going forward.
Absolutely. So one of the things that I think we've noticed over the past, call it 5 years, is that it's no longer a question of if, it's a question of when. So you have to have a huge focus on response. We've been working in combination with MEMA, the counties, the National Guard, Governor's Office of Homeland Security, and MCAC to build out a cyber disruption response plan that allows us to very quickly and efficiently respond to incidents, so that when they do happen, our ability to respond allows us to reconstitute services very quickly. We've had the opportunity to exercise that over the past year and have had phenomenal success with that. So our ability to respond is great. Additionally, we've taken a lot of additional proactive measures using third-party vendors and internal tools to identify potential risk and work with the counties and agencies that aren't under our management to address those and rectify the issues before the bad guys find it.
Thank you.
Chip.
Thank you, Mr. Stewart. I briefly want to just follow up on the talent pipeline management question. And then I think Delegate Sandy Bartlett has a comment or a question for you, Secretary. But my question was, I've heard you say a couple times that it's difficult to hire and retain appropriate talent. And so I guess my question is, do you have a plan to fill a talent pipeline? Whether it's increased hiring, increased, staff payment, different ways of working with contractors. I mean, we would very much like to support, your efforts such that we can make sure that, talent here in Maryland and retaining that talent is not what's holding us back, given the plethora of competition we have around. But I'm curious if you have an ask of the legislature, and if not, if you could provide one by, say, December 1st.
Certainly. Thank you, Senator. Yes, we do have a plan, and we will be talking to you about how you and the legislature can help us. The plan right now includes us working very closely with the folks at the Department of Budget and Management who establish classification and compensation for all positions. We are rewriting the technology-oriented positions descriptions, and we are surveying not just locally but elsewhere with regard to what are the best practices for attracting people of talent and finding ways to pay them. Obviously, IT is a bit different than many other industries, and people are typically changing jobs far more often than they do in a number of other industries. So many of the advantages of government service, longevity, don't appeal to folks. So we're looking at ways to address that. The last piece, as you mentioned, is that we are looking at recruiting nationally. If indeed there are a number of positions that can work remotely, which we are establishing today. I kid my cohort, the CIO in Idaho, that he has some very talented people that would be thrilled to get paid the Maryland salary. And so to the extent we can establish the ability to work remotely, suddenly the people that are available to us all over the country as a potential workforce grows dramatically, and we're exploring that also. But with regard to specifics with the legislature, once we establish our plan with DBM, we will be coming forward to you with that. And as you know, last year you very kindly gave us additional funds for paying IT professionals more. Unfortunately, because of the pandemic response, those funds were cut from our budget.
Yes, it's certainly a challenging time. Well, I look forward to seeing your plan and to working with you. As you know, we also sponsored a bill last year, which, given the short session, didn't have a chance to make it out of committee, but that would have changed the hiring, guidelines, for the state of Maryland in terms of the framework or the degrees that are required. So I look forward to continuing this conversation. Do you have an estimated timeline for when you will have the recommendation after your discussion with DBM?
It is dependent on what comes out of those discussions, so I don't have one today, but as you said, I will endeavor to get you one before December 1st.
Wonderful, thank you, that's great. Okay, Delegate Sandy Bartlett, did you have a question or comment for the Secretary?
Thank you, Senator. I have a comment and a question now that I've had a little bit more time. As you sit here and you listen, all these questions come to mind and you kind of have to pick your top one. So I wanted to say thank you for all the work that has been done with the Business Express online system, because it is awesome. It's awesome in the sense that, it was up and running and even, improved during this time now where, businesses are still in need of filing documents and getting things done. And it was great that it was already in place. And it just needed to be just improved so that all documents essentially could be filed online. So thank you for that. I really appreciate that. There's one complaint, if I may, or question, I'll say, and that is still with the Department of Labor. And I wanted to know, because there are still phone calls that are not being answered. So it's my assumption and my hope that there are phones, phones are automated now. You get them all the time. My family and I joke and we say, if you want to talk to my mother, you press 1. If you want to talk to my brother, you press 2. It's just a joke that we have, a standing joke in my family. But I am still getting constituents who are saying that they are calling and they get absolutely no answer whatsoever. So I went to the Do It page and it says that if you have any IT problems, that there's a new system that agencies can request help. I would like to know, is the Department of Labor requesting your help, and what is being done for the simple process of just getting a person to answer their phone calls?
Thank you so much, Delegate. That is a fantastic question. Our office has the same exact problem. And I was actually informed that the Department of Labor was working with Salesforce at one point so that their numbers could be identified as coming from the Department of Labor instead of spam. But Secretary, why don't you answer that excellent question from the delegate?
Certainly. And let me start, Delegate Bartlett, that I too often have lots of questions come up. So if you'd ever like to talk about these, please reach out to me. I'd love to talk to you. This is a problem that has arisen in places other than Maryland because the volume of calls daily with regard to unemployment insurance, went up 1,000-fold. And so we implemented a number of ways to create what became virtual communication centers and put other folks in state government to work answering those calls. Part of the difficulty we face, as I talked about in the master plan, is that we are moving from telephone technology that has been in place since the 1990s to a voice over IP system across the state. And each agency is doing this with our help, but in their own time. And I had not been asked recently from the folks at Labor about additional help to make sure the phones were answered in a timely way. But as you've brought that up to me, I will be in touch with the secretary over there and offer her our help and be happy to report back to you what we're finding and what we believe is necessary to make sure this problem is addressed and our citizens have access to their government as quickly as humanly possible.
Thank you so much, Secretary. I would really, really appreciate that. And I speak for my colleagues. I know we all would. And, you know, some agencies have in place, or some companies have in place, the system where there's not a person who answers the phone, but you go in a queue if you just put in your phone number. And so it'll tell you, you're going to get, if you just put in your phone number, you will get a call back. And so that way, if we don't have personnel in place, at least people could, you know, feel like they're getting moved along the queue, as opposed to staying on hold for 2 hours only to be later, their call is disconnected. So I call different agencies, or different, not so much agencies, but different companies. And I'm thinking of USAA, for example. If I call them, they'll say, you know, we have an unusual wait time, put in your phone number, and an agency will call you back. It's super helpful. I'm not on hold listening to their music, and I'm not frustrated, and they call me back eventually. So so that's a process as well, if we don't have the personnel to literally pick up the phone at that particular time. It's just a suggestion, and thank you. And I would really appreciate if you could get back to us.
Absolutely, Delegate. And part of the difficulty there is the phone systems we are currently using don't lend themselves immediately to that technology, but we are implementing it a number of places. So absolutely, it's a great suggestion. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you.
Thanks, Secretary. And I appreciate you keeping me in the loop on this, as it is a common complaint that I've had and conversations I've had with the Secretary of Labor. So I look forward to what you guys come up with together as soon as possible. I have, going back to the master plan, I have 3 questions, but I just wanted to ask across the committee members. I'm looking, I don't see any hands up. Once again, if you have any questions, please, you know, message one of the committee staff and they will at least let me know that you have a question. So I have 3 questions with multiple parts. The first is around cybersecurity, the second is around modernization, and the third is around the plan itself. So starting in with cybersecurity, one of your organizational goals and strategic objectives is to create measurable improvements in the cyber posture of the state. And so I'm curious, you know, obviously we don't want to give any secrets away in a public forum, but are you able to provide any kind of overview of what assessments you completed so far, and you know, how and what kind of scores or baselines that you could safely share with the committee? And then following on to that, you mentioned working, you know, with CISA or Department of Homeland Security to kind of support your work. But there seems to be these 2 types of agencies, right? There's the agencies that you work with closely, and these 5 larger agencies who are, you know, more kind of on the federated continuum. And so once again, if we're looking towards creating measurable improvements in the cyber posture of the state, what kind of evidence can you give us that you're getting that information and that we're moving forward?
So that's, excuse me, that's a great question. In terms of the measurable improvement, I'm likely going to undershare with intentionality. So if there's anything specific I can provide, this may not be the right forum, but we'll work to find something that we can get to you guys. So we have a tool that we're using that pulls in a bunch of data, both public data and using discovery tools on the inside to evaluate the posture of systems. The output of that tool is a per unit score that we use to evaluate how each individual unit's doing and track that performance over time. So for example, Unit A might have a score of 600, and Unit C might have a score of 800. Depending on a bunch of variables, we'll we'll make decisions around how to prioritize resources to make sure that we're eliminating the biggest risk to the state and the data first.
That's really helpful.
Yeah.
So do you have these scores for every single agency?
So the answer is yes and no. The quality of the scoring is dependent on how much apparatus we have inside of their environments. So for the more federated units, we have less visibility, so the score is a lower fidelity score. So we're only looking at the outside. But we have some mechanism of scoring for every unit.
And just to add very quickly, although I'm not going to share how we're doing it publicly, but happy to talk about it privately, there are a number of ways we are monitoring the devices we control, and we're looking into using what I'm going to call robotic process automation, or AI, to look for things that are out of the ordinary. As it occurs today, we're collecting millions of pieces of information in real time, and it's rather difficult to look at each of them incrementally. So what we're going to start to do going forward is use tools that allow us to look for patterns that are out of the ordinary. And I know Mr. Stewart has put a lot of thought into that, and in fact we're starting to do that with our ability to track specific assets and the networks that they're on. So Chip, do you want to add anything about that?
I would, and I'd like to tie on to that just with a anecdotal story. Recently, one of the units that we monitor had a firewall misconfiguration that we identified within 12 hours, I believe, got them on the phone. It was a very risky misconfiguration, but because of the apparatus that we have in place, we were able to identify it and have it resolved very, very quickly. And that sort of thing is where you really see the value in these automated scoring tools. And then to tie on to the RPA, there's an entire category of security tools called SOAR, Security Orchestration, Automation, and Response. And that entire category of tools is designed to do the automated response. So when we identify problems, these tools will go out and fix things for us. And that's something we've invested in and we're currently working to deploy in limited use cases now. And as time goes on, larger and larger use cases. And that is the next step in helping to prevent things like ransomware, because when something happens, being able to quickly modify 50,000 systems to prevent that attack after it happens on a single one is where you really see the value of that.
Right. Well done for finding that. What I've learned is that one of the largest weaknesses is often, you people who are just busy doing their jobs and don't have time to do X, Y, and Z for cybersecurity. And I know that DHS mentioned that cyber hygiene, was in their presentation. And I'm curious if you're able to evaluate how agencies are doing in terms of best practices in that area.
So looking at the CRR tool, which is one of the tools that was mentioned, I think that is likely a very good fit, especially with the larger federated units, because that would allow us to say, how are we as a group doing? How are each of the subunits we manage doing? And then how are the ones that are not managed doing? And use that to amalgamate all the best practices and figure out how to ensure that the state as a whole is doing the best we can. So if there's something that another unit's doing where they're doing better than us, I'd love to take that and implement it widely.
So just so that I'm clear, that CRR tool was one of the things that was shared earlier this morning, and that's a potential area for collaboration between us and the Department of Homeland Security.
Absolutely. That's the cyber resiliency toolkit, cyber resiliency review.
Yeah, there were just so many of them. It's hard to keep them all straight, but that's awesome that we've already identified an area of potential collaboration. Okay, so are there other questions on cybersecurity before we move on to modernization? Okay, I see, hold on, I'm checking the chat box. I've got a notification here. It says there's no questions in the chat function. It's kind of funny. I do have one last one, and that is specifically, you know, I am a mom of two wonderful girls, both in school, at least partially, if not fully online right now. Is MSDE one of the agencies that you work very closely with, or is it one of the large agencies that is federated that you have less oversight over?
So that's a great question. And the answer is it's a little bit of both. So we've been working with MSDE over the past 24 months to bring them in. MSDE is comprised of a bunch of subunits as well. Most of them are fully contained within the Do It management structure. But MSDE as a whole is working to move in, and we've made great strides in the past several months in doing so.
Okay, and has there been a specific effort in the, you know, during this pandemic? Because I think our risk is even higher now than it ever was before.
I'll let Secretary Leahy step in here.
I was going to mention that with regard to security, Chip is absolutely right. With regard to a number of programmatic thrusts, they are one of the agencies that have significant legacy technology that, unfortunately, to fix one thing, you have to fix 10 things. And the pandemic has created some budget challenges that we don't have a specific plan to change how they're doing business in a number of areas. Senator, but to your point, as you and I have discussed, again, the consolidation and standardization of methodologies goes a long way, particularly with things like broadcasting for education and interactive systems, that we think we are going to have a huge impact with MSDE over the next year, because it's a focus now of both of our efforts.
Well, that's wonderful to hear. And I suggest, just as you're having the follow-up with the Secretary of the Department of Labor, I had a conversation with the State Board of Education last Friday about the digital divide, about connectivity, about the way we're paying for our devices, and about online learning overall. So, and they had mentioned that they've had a work group looking at this since last August of 2019. So I suggest that, you know, if we can follow up with Dr. Salmon and get some clarity on where we're headed, that we prioritize this such that we have something in place for the summer of 2021. Because undoubtedly there are going to be people who, you know, have not had access to the best of our Maryland teaching, you know, over this year. That everybody's doing the best that they can, but we need to be ready to provide them additional resources next summer, which I think, you know, some of which will probably be provided online. Let's see. So let's transition to modernization, given our conversation on legacy systems. And, you know, this obviously is part of your strategic plan. In the last hearing, you know, I had asked about the status of our IT modernization, you know, plans. And I saw that there's something like 54 different ones written into the strategic plan. But I still am left not knowing, kind of not with a roadmap for where the state is going on IT modernization. And the questions I asked last time, you know, is, you know, which of our agencies have a modernization plan? What is the appropriate time frame to expect full modernization across all the state agencies? And what is the estimated cost of full modernization, knowing that oftentimes there are federal grants that are 90% federal, 10% state, that we can and have leveraged in the past. But I'd like to have a more consolidated picture of where we're going in terms of modernization. Other states, such as Massachusetts, who we had invited, but hopefully we'll hear from them next time, have introduced legislation that actually uses their bonding authority to promote a long-term investment in their IT infrastructure, which is becoming as important as the roads and the highways on which we drive. So can you give us any more concrete thoughts on the status of our IT modernization across the state.
Well, as I said, in assessing what we have and how we're using it, I think there are three things we have to get agreement on before we can talk about enterprise modernization. And the first one is we have to get folks in government to be more data-centric. As things operate today, we are more focused on the hardware and software than on what information we have that's available to use and how we're using it. As you've heard, I'm sure, I implemented a process as part of our new intake process starting about a year ago, where I have asked secretaries, rather than bringing me a technology solution to a problem, I've asked them to bring me a problem in plain English. And then we will talk about that problem from neither expertise, but rather from a learning perspective for both of us. And that does two things for us. To the extent we already have a technology in place, we're not going to reinvent the wheel. You know, all too often I have found instances where 5 agencies, in attempting to modernize things, want to go do 5 different things when we have a tool that, if adopted, would work to solve their problem. So we are working very hard to do more of that. The second piece is, as I said, we have significant technology debt, and it's not just Maryland, it is many states.
Right.
And so the second piece of this goes to, what is our philosophy? As you said, Massachusetts has decided that they are looking at bonding methodologies because it is their intent to own the hardware and the software. I personally am a different mind. I think the technology is going to continue to change, and by locking ourselves into a particular technology that we own, we create the likelihood that every 10 or 15 years we're going to have the same technology debt issue over and over again. So to the extent I, as the CIO, can act as a broker to find ways to do technology as a service rather than as an infrastructure or capital measure, I would prefer to do that because I think that gives the state additional flexibility. And then the third aspect of it is something we've touched on in a number of ways today. As you said, our goal is to serve citizens where we find them. And the world is shifting dramatically. You know, anybody under the age of 30 does everything on their smartphone now. And I kiddingly ask people if they have checking accounts, and if they do, if they mail any checks. And I can tell them exactly who they mail checks to every year because it's always government agencies. And so in attempting to modernize a number of these aspects of how we want to deal with people, people are looking for additional convenience, and our ability to do things virtually and build applications in the cloud, in my estimate, is the way to go. But I still have to convince various agencies that indeed this is in their best interest. And secondarily, you know, as I've discussed, there are a number of very important systems in the state, for example, our financial systems in FEMAS, that have served the state incredibly well for almost 30 years now, are written in computer languages that are not typically taught or used these days, and we are reaching the point that the individuals that have worked on these systems for the state are all at or reaching retirement age, and we are, you know, taking great pains to figure out how we address that and what systems we believe are appropriate. But even though DoIT is responsible for the technology, the implementation of that technology is dependent on decisions by the comptroller and others that they have to sign off on it before we can move forward. And, we just haven't reached the point yet that we have agreement on what is necessary to do that. So that is just a function of continuing to educate each other and me hopefully becoming a better advocate for what I think is the way we should move forward.
Secretary, I really appreciated what you said about being a broker and letting the agencies drive the process improvement and letting DeWitt work on the technology modernization. I think everybody's on the same page with that. I'm wondering if there's a part of this that has to do, as we move to, infrastructure as a service and platform as a service, you had alluded to kind of this in your master plan. And that obviously poses kind of new budgetary considerations for our state agency. How do we think about this as we plan, for our budgets? I mean, it's obvious that Massachusetts and Georgia are moving in this way, and NASCIO has made it a top priority. But I think at the state level, we have to make sure that we have the money required for modernization, even if we're letting the agencies drive those process improvements. How do we do that?
Well, I think there are two things. As you've said, our implementation of TBM lays out our methodology for how we are going to assess what tools we have, how efficient they are, and as you said, what's the return on investment. So once that is fully in place, we will have a much better picture of where we have, the opportunities to get the biggest bang for the buck. And then the question really becomes one of how do we get the various branches of government, and particularly the agencies that are federated and more independent today, to agree on not only a funding mechanism, but a strategy. As I told you in a discussion the other day, the state of Virginia has just passed legislation giving their chief data officer the ability to assess a minute millage against each agency to pay for the data methodologies, data governance, and data analytics he wants to implement, so they have better insight into what the tools they have are doing and what data they use and need. And in the past, each agency has, again, approached data in their own way there. He is standardizing that. So the key to all of this, I believe, is to talk about what goals we set for standardization and consolidation, and then agree on what the agencies and the legislature and the comptroller and the treasurer see as an equitable methodology of funding them. Because I'll give you a very simple example. We just won an award for our Maryland First radio systems, but we have considerable disagreement amongst agencies about how to fund the radios that they are responsible for. So DeWitt maintains the system, but agencies decide which radios and how many they purchase themselves. And the way we have assessed that in the past has caused significant disagreement. And there are different models to assess how we should make folks pay for these things. And in some cases, agencies that are paying very little today would have to pay significantly more. And so obviously they're very unhappy with those methodologies. And other agencies that are paying a lot and would have to pay little think they're wonderful. So again, it's a question of either getting folks to agree or imposing a system if we don't have one. And we have lots of thoughts about that we're happy to share with you.
Are there specific regulatory or procurement impediments that get in the way of being able to modernize an agency's systems?
Well, I think there are two things going on here. As you know, we are engaged in a gigantic shift that all procurement for my agency and the Department of Management and Budget has been assigned to the Department of General Services. They legislatively created the Office of State Procurement, and they just began their operations last October and immediately were faced with dealing with COVID and the need to procure PPP and other things on an emergency basis. So I think it's premature to talk about whether the new system is going to address what I have seen as the typical complaints about procurement in terms of things taking too long or the assumptions in the process requiring significantly greater diligence than we see in business. And that is not to say I want to play fast and loose with the taxpayers' money. I take it very seriously that we are fiduciaries, but at the same time, I am more of a proponent of punishing people that overtly break the rules rather than structuring rules in such a way that we assume everyone would break them if they were not policed, to the 99th degree. And we are working with the Office of State Procurement to attempt to simplify a number of those processes. And, I've talked to folks in the comptroller's office about his concerns about competition, and, I hope those discussions bear fruit. So the simple answer is we, like every other government, are attempting to find the balance between protecting the resources that we're charged with being a fiduciary for and making the process as effective and efficient as possible. And again, we have lots of ideas, but we have to come to a consensus, and I am looking to the Office of State Procurement to guide us as to what their vision is, because they're responsible for this now. So we're inputting them with our information, but to this point, they're doing the heavy lifting, and I think it's premature to know how well their new implementation is going to work or not, given that they've been at it for a relatively short period of time, just a year, and they've had lots of things intervene that make it more difficult to do their job.
Okay, understood. In terms of a next step, maybe what we could do is try to ensure, to at least have the discussion with the Department of State Procurement and MSDE to say, hypothetically, like if, education, online education and upgrading our legacy systems is a priority, do we know, how we as a state could go about that and if there are any regulatory or procurement barriers? So maybe you and I could take that on as a next step.
Certainly. And to the point you made earlier, we have a wonderful example of using federal funding. MD Think is a significant modernization of our human services and our Medicare and Medicaid systems that will put us in the forefront nationally. And, our federal partners have paid 90% for some of that work, 75% for others, and 50%. So clearly taking advantage of all those opportunities to garner federal aid is something we look to explore at every opportunity.
Excellent. I have only one more question for you, and I want to check in again with my other committee members if any of the senators or delegates have questions for the Secretary or Mr. Stewart. I'm not seeing any hands raised. We are going to stay on the line and just talk about upcoming legislation that our committee could introduce on behalf of the committee after that. But seeing no more questions, I just want to ask my final question. And either fortunately or unfortunately, you're talking to somebody who's been in consulting for a while in my prior to being a senator career. And I had these SMART goals burned into me, for the past 20 years. Goals should be specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And I'm sure I'm not saying anything that anybody doesn't know, but I look at your strategy, and it's much more visionary and kind of change management focused than it is specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time bound. And so my question is, have you given any thought to a companion document that would actually set out some specific goals and indicators that would help us to let us know if we're achieving the strategy, laid out in your strategic document? And I think you mentioned that Steve had looked at 50 other states. And if there is another state that has some SMART goals aligned with its policy document, I would very much like to be able to read that. And I just want to welcome Delegate Michael Jackson, my wonderful co-chair, who's been doing double duty this morning. I'm sure he's figured out all the vaccination issues across the state of Maryland. Welcome, Delegate Jackson.
You're so kind. You're so kind. Hello, everyone.
Thank you for joining us. So we've had a great conversation thus far. We're just wrapping up our conversation with Do It. And I'm just asking them if they have plans to develop a companion document to their excellent strategy, which goes beyond their vision to some concrete and SMART goals that they can report on in future years.
I'm going to give you an answer that will satisfy neither of us, because I agree with you. You're preaching to the choir about establishing SMART goals. But I think we face a far more significant issue that in the past, agencies have operated as silos, and the intervention of technology makes it possible to integrate a number of things together, use resources multiple times in ways that do two things. And one is terrific and the other is terrible for agencies. The terrific piece is, as I said earlier, you don't have to reinvent the wheel, and you are likely to find people that are dealing with the technology that we can modularize so that we can apply it quickly to a new need. The downside for agencies is this leads them to concern themselves with the likelihood that people outside of the agency have access to their dirty laundry, and things that are very human and very regular problems that they're fearful to acknowledge because we all want to look like we're doing things perfectly. I mean, as I've told you, Senator, and not to bore the rest of the committee, my first day at Do It, I made a speech to the troops about my view of failure, and that if I didn't fail at 75% of what I was trying, I was playing it too safe, because we all have to stretch. And when I say that, I don't mean fail in the sense that it's disastrous. I mean, if we are operating at a level of 5 and I want to aim for 20 and I only got to 15, that's technically a failure. But there's improvement, and I've learned a lot, and the things that didn't work lead to my ability to take that knowledge and apply it elsewhere. So we may find that we go down paths that turn out to not lead where we want to go. And I would submit it is far more important to find that out quickly and turn around and change your path, rather than, as we have in the past, build waterfall systems that we turn it on 5 years later and it doesn't work. So the simple answer is, I think it is more important that we create a culture of trust and a methodology of change management than that we focus on what particular agency's projects ought to be. But to your point, I think it is certainly worth creating such a document to the extent it's possible. And as I've said, there are some things we can point to, like what's been done with MD Think, that have shown not only great promise, but significant improvement. So I am happy to take that on, and we'll report back to you how we plan to approach it. And if you have further suggestions, we'd love to hear them.
Sounds good.
Well, wonderful. I would appreciate that. You know, I think, like you said, I wasn't going to be entirely happy with that answer, and I'm not sure that I am, but I love working with you. And so I can see a couple conversations in our future that where we try to develop some clear, you know, goals and metrics for cybersecurity modernization. And even you can measure culture, and you can measure increase and decrease in trust across culture. So whatever it is we're trying to do, we got to find out a way to measure it so we can make sure that we're moving in the right direction. But you know, point taken, not all of this has to be public. We want to keep our agencies, you know, safe so that they don't have to air their dirty laundry. And with that, Delia Jackson, I know you just joined us. Do you have any comments or questions you'd like to chime in before we move on to members' legislation?
No, I'm good.
Senator.
And Secretary Leahy, I look forward to working with you in the future. We've been working together since you got here. And I too enjoy our working relationship, and look forward to the progress that we're going to make together. So thank you, Senator.
Thank you so much. Senator, the one thing I would like to, before we finish, you had asked if Mr. Colby had seen anything specific in terms of establishing a documentation of measurable goals. Steve, could you address that very quickly? What states have taken a different approach to what we're taking, and could you point those out to the senator so she can find that as a reference?
Of course, Secretary. I don't have specific states, but I would rather just speak generally, and I might, if it's okay, I'll follow up with some examples. Yep, but you are correct that the strategic plan document that we developed this year is at a much more visionary level. I think that's a good word choice. Typically, what we saw in our review is with documents that followed or master plans that followed that more visionary approach is that there was a tactical action plan document that accompanied that. Mm-hmm. And indeed, that is something that our office is working on.
Excellent. So I'm not completely crazy. Wonderful. If you could, offline, if you could send us a couple of those tactical action plans that accompany the vision, that would be wonderful. Because I love the vision. It's a great vision. I just thought that there was another piece. So I'm glad that you're one step ahead of us and already moving in that direction.
Thank you.
So thank you, Mr. Colby. Thank you, Secretary. Thank you, Mr. Stewart. You're of course welcome to stay on for the next 15 minutes, but if you have other things you have to do, you're also welcome to duck out. So thank you so much for your time and interest this morning. So now we're moving on to the last part of our agenda. It is one of the wonderful things we can do as a committee, which is to look at legislation and have it be introduced as a recommendation of the committee. And just what I wanted to do in the next 15 minutes was just to ask all of the members of the committee to say a few words about any of the legislation they are interested in either reintroducing or introducing for the first time that they would like our committee to take up as potential recommendations of the committee. I'm not sure, Ricky, can you tell us, did anybody kind of write in and say they had specific pieces of legislation they wanted to discuss?
No, I don't think any of us heard from anyone about that over the last.
Okay. Let's see. Great. I don't know if Senator Lee is still with us. I know she had a couple of great bills that she wanted to reintroduce. Senator Lee, are you there? Or Delegate Feldmark, I know you had a couple bills. If not, I can go ahead with some of the ones that I'm thinking about reintroducing, most of which are with Delegate Michael Jackson.
Absolutely.
Okay, so why don't I just read through these? And once again, in terms of process, this is just kind of an FYI for all of our committee members so that we can know what's out there. And then when we meet next time, we will be voting as a committee on which of these should be joint committee bills. And I know that committee staff has also been working on a reporting bill. And so after I run through these quickly, I'm going to turn it over to committee staff to just give us the basics so members can weigh in on the contents of this committee bill. Bear with me for just a second. Hold on, I'm looking for my list. So all of these are three bills that Delegate Jackson and I introduced last year. They made it to various points in the Senate and the House. And I think we'll be introducing all three of them again. Would love to have the committee vote on them to see if they could be committee products. The first one was, and I apologize, Delegate Jackson, I only have the Senate bill numbers here, but these were all done by me. The first was the Maryland State IT Hiring Act. This was Senate Bill 724. And, you know, per our conversation about talent and recruiting talent, this bill would have required the Secretary of DeWitt, the state CISO, and the Secretary of DBM to establish minimum qualification requirements for employees in IT and cybersecurity roles in accordance with the NIST security framework. So this was in finance, but it did not make it out of that committee. The second thing that we looked at was Senate Bill 1049, the Cybersecurity Workforce Partnership Act of 2020. This would have created a grant program for the staffing of a private sector talent pipeline management planning initiative, as well as targeted grants between individual companies and public education institutions, such as community colleges, to develop training-based curriculum and certificates to fill jobs needs. The last bill, which passed unanimously in the Senate, was the Cybersecurity Coordination and Operations Office, SB 1036. This would have created a Cybersecurity Coordination Operations Office through MEMA to coordinate regional responses to cybersecurity threats and build capacity at the local level among our counties and our schools to have the state supporting them at the local level with increased readiness and capacity. This made it through the Senate, as I said, unanimously, but did not receive a vote in the House. And something that's really interesting about this bill is that at the national level, the federal level, which was included in the National Defense Act, whatever it was, Statute 3207 over the summer, they actually did something very similar, which created a cybersecurity coordination office at the federal level with a point person in each state. So if you're thinking about having a very organized response, it would start at the federal level, go down to the point person, likely the CISO in the state of Maryland, and then we would have that go through MEMA to build a full network of folks providing the support at the local level. So those were the three bills that I wanted to share, and I'll just check.
And
go ahead.
Yeah, and Senator, I look forward to us getting those three bills through this year. You know, that modified session got a little dicey for everyone. So we're looking to, if we could have the members that are on board to, you know, support those bills, continue to support those bills, as well as us making the decision on the bills that Delegate Fellmark and Senator Lee and others may have, so we can get a good running start. You know, try to put our package together and to go to work on those, and so we don't get lost in, you know, obviously COVID and the meeting I was on earlier and the budget. You know, those are going to be taking priority, but there's no reason we can't get ours through as well. So we just need to have a concerted effort. So just wanted to reiterate that to the members. So
thank you very much, Delegate Jackson. So I know there are lots of good other bills out there. We will collect those in advance and take a vote on all of the members' bills next week. Let's close off this session by just talking to committee staff. They've been working on a reporting bill, which would help us to get a handle on what's going on in the state. And I don't know, is it Erica? Are you prepared to talk about that?
Yes, I am. Let me do the share screen. One moment.
You know, what's more exciting than reporting on like IT modernization, guys? I mean, this is like.
I know. I mean, it's affecting us in every way, shape, and form. I mean, look at Dorchester County. I mean, they had to reverse their move to have their kids in school. They got to send them back home, and that's a rural county. And so here we are again with our IT concerns for our young folks and our educators, so that we don't miss a beat. So no, this is exciting. We will capitalize. So.
Okay, are you ready for me? So what you have in front of you, the chair in discussions of planning this meeting, you know, and she's already mentioned the state of Georgia and the state of Massachusetts. What you see before you is basically a summary of the type of data that Georgia collects annually, modified, you know, per potential for you guys to discuss and see if this is something that you would like to see do it, gathering and reporting also on an annual basis. You can see under number 1, the basic flow of this would have the state agencies required to report to do it. Step 2 would be do it, then compiling and tracking all of those reports, and then putting them into one singular report for you all. And some of the information that we were thinking of having state agencies report is about you know, staff pins, exactly to the point that you've already discussed with the secretary, about being able to competitively hire staff for this, as well as a breakout of their IT budget by these various categories, which are similar to what Georgia requires. Any major IT things that they're looking forward to doing in the future, and then plans for upcoming fiscal years as well to implement the agency's IT goals. Then do it, the next step is do it would then compile all of this and then also break it out into, you know, by agency, by fiscal year, and by categories. And then finally, to make the data kind of work and move the state forward, the idea is that based on all this data that they've collected and based on their analysis, they would then make any recommendations about best practices, efficiencies, cost-saving strategies, security, etc. So that's the idea behind this.
And I think having this data on the data would be incredibly helpful for the legislature. And so I've got 2 follow-up questions, Erica. We in the, you know, one of the slides earlier, you know, there's some talk about Article 3A 300, and you know, are we actually able, like, if we pass legislation such as this, would this enable all agencies, mandate all agencies to report to do it? And can that be done in a way that we don't compromise the security of those agencies?
Yeah, I mean, in past legislation that's required reporting in those certain situations, there's usually a clause that's included that says, you know, the agencies, you know, for any confidential proprietary type information that they're excluded from reporting that. So that's absolutely can be included for point of clarity.
Any other questions for committee staff on a potential reporting bill around IT, cybersecurity, and modernization?
No, you know, are you submitting the bill? No? Yes.
Huh?
It's for discussion, Delegate Jackson.
Well, okay. I guess, you know, when we meet next, I mean, so when are we going to vote on the bill package?
At our next meeting. So we
Okay.
would have to have an LR number and a draft, you know, by that time.
Okay, yeah.
Probably.
Absolutely.
If I may.
Yeah,
Probably
I think.
early. Oh, sorry about that. Probably
Wait, I was
early.
just, Ricky, you go.
Okay, I was gonna say probably early December would be a good time. At that point, everyone will have a chance to get LR numbers and have something that they can present.
Yeah. And I think the idea of sharing this in this meeting is just to the extent that members have additional thoughts. You can certainly send them to us staff, and then the document that we put before you in that final meeting would include those additional thoughts. This was just to give you a basic idea of some of the stuff that would be included.
Excellent. Well, I certainly feel like we covered a lot of ground today. I'd like to thank everybody for their time and their thoughtful questions. I think our committee staff will be in touch to help schedule the next meeting. I know that we've got so much going on right now with COVID-19, and vaccination is obviously more timely right now than this. But I just want to, we said early on, Delegate Jackson, that you were doing double duty. And is there any kind of closing remarks on this committee's work that you'd like to make before we call it a day?
And look, I am, first of all, I'm proud to be a part of this committee. As we navigate how broad this committee is, what's interesting is that with all things that are occurring around us, our committee is growing more and more important to everyone, our committee members. Look, I take my hat off to our staff. You did a terrific job. For everyone who participated today, Senator, you in particular, for holding up my end of the deal while I had to be in the other session. But I think we're doing good work here. Let's just keep pushing it.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you to all staff. I really appreciate it. And everybody have a great afternoon and stay safe.
Senator, we'll speak soon.
Oh.